We've gone through resource creation once for our REST API with users. You're going to do it again in this video with tasks. So down below, I have the challenge comments outlining what I'd like you to do. The big picture goal is to set up the task creation endpoint. Now, there's no need to worry about linking a task with a specific user who created it. We'll start to handle all of that when we talk about authentication a bit later in the class. Now down below, there are 3 main steps for getting this done. Step number 1 is to create a separate file for the task model. So we want to break the task model out of mongoose.js and into a new file in the models directory, similar to what we did with user.js. That file is going to get loaded into index.js, the current file, and it'll get used to actually create the new task. Step 2. You want to set up the endpoint. So we want to set up the new post endpoint. And right here, we want to make sure that when we create the task, we send back things for the success and for the error cases, much like we did with users up above. We hope things go well, but they don't always go well. It's important to be responsible and handle errors correctly. Step number 3, you want to test your work from Postman. Try to create a task using valid data, then try to create a task using invalid data, and make sure you get the correct response depending on the type of data you provided. So that is it for the setup. The process is going to be pretty similar to what we did in the last video. Take some time to knock that out, test your work, and when you're done, come back and click play. How'd that go? Let's work through the process together. Step number 1, we want to create that new file in the models directory for the tasks model. Right here, I'll call that task.js, and we're going to bring the model file over from where it currently lives in mongoose.js. I'm going to take the task, I'll cut it out of this file, and I'll bring it over to the new file. Now we do have to make sure we have mongoose required since we are using it right here. So up top, we can get that done. Const mongoose equals, we will call requiring the mongoose library. The last thing we need to do is export task so other files can actually use it. Module.exports, setting it equal to task, which is defined on line 3 up above. So now task.js is complete, and model.js, mongoose.js, does almost nothing, and this is fine. This is exactly what we want in the file, a single responsibility. Mongoose connects to the database, user.js defines the user model, and task.js defines the task model. Next up, inside of index.js, we have step number 2. We want to make sure to set up that endpoint. Before we do, let's load in the task model. So up above, just below where I grab user, or above, the order isn't important, const task equals, I will require the new file, ./models/task, excellent. Now we can set up another call to app.post to set up our other resource creation endpoint. App.post, setting up the path, which would be /tasks, and setting up that callback function. We get the request, we get the response, and inside of the function, we're going to go through the process of actually creating the new task. To start that off, const task equals. Right here, I'll use the new operator with the task constructor function, and once again, I will provide request.body as the object which contains the properties we're trying to set up for the new task we're creating. Next up, we'll be calling task.save in an attempt to save that new task to the database. Now things might go well, or they might go poorly. We want to handle both cases. So I'll set up a then call for when the promise is fulfilled right here. We'll go ahead and set up that callback function inside of then, and I'll use response.send to send back the task if things go well. Down below, we'll be setting up that catch call as well. This one gets access to the error that occurred. And down below, inside of that function, I'll use response.status to set up the 400 status code, and then I'll use .send with E to send back the error. Now let's go ahead and move on to the final step, which is to test things out from Postman. I'm going to remove the challenge comments down below. I'm going to go ahead and save index.js, and we're going to set up a new request in the task app collection. Right here, from the menu, I'll add a new request, and I can name this one something like create task, and down below, it's already selected the task app collection. I'll save the new request, and I can click it to go through the process of actually filling it out. For this one, we are indeed using the post method, so let's make sure to switch that up inside of VSC. We called app.post when we set up the route. Then we'll set up the URL. That's localhost:3000/tasks. Now, currently, this is not enough to actually fire it off in a way that causes a task to be created. I could go ahead and send it off, but we're going to get validation errors back with a 400 status code. We want to make sure to provide the necessary data. So right here, body, we'll go down to raw. We're going to switch from text over to JSON. Then we'll go through the process of defining the data we want to send. Now, the only thing we have to define is the task description. So over inside of task.js, we have our model definition, we have description, which is required, and we have completed, which is optional. So over in Postman, I will set up description, and I'll go ahead and give it a value equal to what the task I'm creating is going to be. I'll go ahead and do something like finish Node.js course. Now, if I go ahead and actually send that off, we'll be able to see our response down below. Right here, I am getting the 200 status code, and I am seeing my brand new task created. One thing worth pointing out is that completed has correctly been set to false, which is the default value for that field. So right here, we have a pretty great setup for our two resource creation endpoints. There's just one last thing I want to take a quick moment to talk about, and it's related to the status code we're using when we do create a user or a task. By default, if you send back data and you don't change the status, Express sets it to 200, assuming that things went well. As we saw, we can always customize that. Now, in our case, if we head back over to that HTTP statuses website and go to the home page, we can see that there are more than one way to say that things went well. We have a few different success codes. 200 is a generic OK. 201 signifies that something has been created. So that is a more appropriate status code for our purposes. Now, changing it from a 200 to a 201 isn't going to affect the behavior of the API in any major way, but it's all about providing the most clear information possible. So over inside of index.js, to wrap this up, I can actually add on status calls right here. Response.status, setting it equal to a 201. Then we'll call send to send back the user. And down below, we'll do the same thing for the task. So .status, then chaining on the send call, once again, setting it equal to a 201. Now, if we were to test things out from Postman, we would see that we're still able to create new tasks. The only change is in the status code that's coming back. Now that we have this in place, we have wrapped up our resource creation endpoints for the REST API. We're going to continue on working on the other endpoints in the next video, so let's go ahead and jump into that.